Always do like a bit of Simple Minds, especially in the morning. And what a song it is too, Glittering Prize. And it is my pleasure now to be having a chat with Matthew Dickinson about all the latest tech talk. It's the start of the day, give me a break. Tech talk. So before we do that, we've got to do the tradition.
Time now for the latest news on what's hot and what's not in the world of technology with Matthew Dickinson on Tech Talk. Here on DCFM 88.9.
Yes, okay. Well, it is my pleasure, as I was saying, to welcome you along. How are you today?
Good, thanks. You obviously need that morning coffee to get your mouth working properly.
It's still not, it's probably going too fast now. Too many coffees. But anyway, we've got a lot to talk about. How about this web addiction as a new study spins new spectrum of internet dependency?
Internet addiction spectrum. I mean, the reality is that we've only had easy access to the internet, common access to the internet for maybe 3 decades, a little bit over that possibly. And so we don't really have enough data, enough background data to know how much it might be impacting people. But there's some studies that are starting to be done now to look at internet addiction, look at different levels of usage for people. And there's some scary data that's coming out of that. So for example, under 24-year-olds, average amount of time for the survey group, and there was 796 people in this survey group, average amount of time for an under 24-year-old, 6 hours a day, every day, which seems like a lot. But then you look at the amount of average usage for people over the age of 24, so I think you and I just slip into that bracket there. And
just quite.
just sneak over the top there.
We wish.
4.6 hours a day. And I thought, there's no way I would use the internet for 4.6 hours a day. But then when you think about it,
You do.
you think about, oh, I just need to look up whether that place is open at the moment. I just need to get a phone number to ring some particular place. Oh, what am I doing this weekend? I'll go and check what is on this weekend. There's so many things you're doing, just accessing the internet for so many different things. So 4.6 hours a day, I don't think that's unusual. Now, they broke up the addictions into 5 different categories. And so, and when I say addictions, the number 1 category wasn't addicted. That was just casual use. You use the internet as needed. When you got to level 4 and level 5, level 4 actually sounded worse than level 5 in my mind, because level 4 was you're addicted, but you're in denial. So someone says, do you use the internet a lot? No, don't use it very much. Could you do without it for a day or two? Sure, I could do without it for a day or two, and then realising that maybe a minute or two might be too long. So that's a group. But then the group that is just straight out addicts. These are people that are addicted. They start to suffer anxiety. They start to suffer withdrawals, literally, from being away from the internet. You're talking about 24% of this group that they surveyed being in that category. So that may not reflect exactly across society, but it might give you a bit of an indication. And this is the group that literally cannot be off the internet, cannot be away from the internet. They feel like they're missing out, an extreme case of FOMO, fear of missing out. So this is the sort of thing that we're having happen. How does this affect your mental health? How does this affect your operation or engagement in society on a day-to-day basis if you're just so focused on being online all the time? A lot of the activity obviously is on a smartphone, not so much sitting in front of a computer, and you probably notice it more if you're on a computer. On a smartphone, maybe you don't notice it so much.
But that's one thing too. I always find it weird when I haven't got my mobile phone, I've left it at home and I had to come to work and I went, you know what I mean? Because you depend on it these days.
Well, if you were a true addict, then you wouldn't stay here and go, oh, I've left my phone. You'd say, I'm sorry, I'm going back home. Can we just have dead air for 10 minutes while I go back home and get my phone and come back, because I just can't do without it. So it is a bit sad in some respects, but this is the society we've created, and we almost expect that instant response. If you send a friend a message, and you don't get an answer back in a few minutes, you think, oh, what's wrong? Have I offended them? And so then you might send another message to follow up and say, is everything okay? And then you start stressing and worrying about it. Meanwhile, they may be on a plane and they can't access it, or they're asleep, or whatever it might be. So it is something that's affecting people a lot.
What about this Tom Hanks for nothing, and Tom denounces dental deepfake deception?
There are ads out there at the moment where you'll see Tom Hanks advertising a dental insurance scheme. Now you think about Tom Hanks, you think he's actually had 1 or 2 movies that have been reasonably successful.
Just teeny weeny ones.
Yeah, and you probably think at some stage during that process, he probably got paid a couple of dollars to do those. And here we are, where we think, gee, Tom Hanks is doing it tough. He's had to resort to doing ads for some dental program to make enough money to put food on the table. Poor old Tom. And so you think about it, you think, well, that probably isn't him. But then you look at these deep fakes. Now, with someone like Tom Hanks or any famous actor, really, you've got huge amounts of video footage, huge amounts of audio footage, and so you can feed that into a deep fake creator. You can feed it into an AI tool to create deep fakes. Because there's so much video footage and so much audio footage, it can create a really good likeness of that particular person with really close sounding voice to their real voice. So when you see these ads for dental insurance schemes, you think, that's Tom Hanks. It's obvious it's Tom Hanks. Look at it. Looks exactly like him and it sounds exactly like him, but Tom Hanks never said those words and Tom Hanks never was videoed in these ads. So he's gone out there and he said, this is not me. I'm not advertising any dental program. And then also taking the opportunity to say, this is why AI is so scary. Why do we need actors in movies anymore? Why do we need writers to write the scripts for these movies anymore when we've got all these AI tools, which is obviously the strike that's been going on by both actors and writers in America. This is obviously all part of it. So Tom's taking the opportunity to say, that's not me, but also point out the dangers here. I've seen other deep fakes from some other famous people like Bear Grylls, for example, like Elon Musk. So there are these other deep fakes around the place. And I suppose you've just got to take everything with a grain of salt. But if they're advertising a product, even though you know it's not really Tom Hanks, you still might actually hear about that dental insurance program because it's being talked about in general.
You see a lot of those in Facebook too, like Richard Wilkins and all these big TV stars and how they've been fired or something like that, but it's not true.
Well, there was a magazine in, I don't know where it was, it might have been in Germany, that said they had an exclusive interview with Michael Schumacher. Now, you're probably well aware that Michael Schumacher, Formula One world champion, multiple world champion, he had an accident and has got a brain injury and his family's very private about that ongoing treatment. And so they were just as shocked as anyone else to read that there'd been this exclusive interview. And then at the end of the interview, it said this was created by AI. So they're actually being sued, that magazine's being sued by the family because of that. But this is the sort of thing, there are so many things out there and they look real, they sound real. Maybe they are real, but maybe they're not. So you've just got to take everything with a grain of salt at the moment.
Indeed we do, especially when it comes to internet. But you were talking sort of about how the internet interacts with us. So the ChatGPT breaks the ice and browsers in real time. Tell us about that.
Well, ChatGPT in the past has always had a cut-off date. So for a long time there, it was September 2021. So any information past that, it didn't know about, and it was quite upfront. If you asked a question about current affairs, it would say, sorry, I don't know anything past September 2021. And then it did get upgraded to go as far as January 2022. And there was a number of reasons for that. And I think as they were trying to experiment with the technology, they wanted to make sure they had the information correct. They had an ability to more or less fact check to make sure the information was correct. And it made it much quicker to return results when I didn't have to go and search the internet every time. But they were losing out. And remember, this is ChatGPT's world domination play here. They were losing out to some other search engines like Google, like various search engines that are out there where it was actually information that was real time. So they've now upgraded it and they've said it'll use this background information, but if it needs to, it will go to a current bit of information. So it'll actually use Bing because it's a partnership with Microsoft. It'll use Bing to look for that current information. So I tried a little experiment. I thought, well, that's interesting. 2 weeks ago, if I had have said, who won the 2022 NRL Grand Final, it wouldn't have known. It would have said, sorry, refer to something else. A couple of days ago, without this upgrade, if I said, who won the 2023 Grand Final, wouldn't have known. But now with this upgrade, I said, who won the NRL Grand Final in 2023? And it gave me an answer. It said, Penrith Panthers beat Brisbane Broncos, gave me the score, gave me the number of spectators at the game, and it said this was the greatest comeback in NRL Grand Final history. So I thought, well, that's interesting. It got all that correct. I'm going to go a step further. And I said, how do you mean the greatest comeback in NRL Grand Final history? Can you explain that further? Now, if it was a journalist writing that article, you'd probably think that they would explain that as part of the article because it's a curious comment to make. If that was the greatest, do you mean greatest in terms of amount of time left on the clock to score? Do you mean the greatest in terms of the points differential? And what was the other example that was the greatest before this? All these curious questions pop into your mind. And so it said it was the greatest comeback in terms of points. The previous greatest comeback was, and then it gave me an example that was completely wrong. It said they came back from 14-point deficit at halftime in the grand final, which wasn't correct. It was 14-point deficit later on in the game. And then it said, and it came back in Penrith Panthers to beat South Sydney Rabbitohs by 20 points to 14. And you think, no, a minute ago you told me it was Brisbane Broncos. Now you've said South Sydney Rabbitohs. They did beat the South Sydney Rabbitohs 2 years ago, but the score wasn't 20 points to 14. And then I asked for further information. I said, how do you mean the greatest comeback? So then it gave me an example from 1989 when the Canberra Raiders beat the Tigers, and that was coming back from a 10-point deficit. But the greatest comeback before this one was in 1999, where the Storm came back from 14-0 to beat St George. So again, when you start saying, give me the latest information, that's when a bit of its fact-checking goes out, and it gets to the point where it says, I'll just go and get any information out there, whether it's accurate or not.
It gets a bit confusing.
Absolutely right. And again, this is where you can't just rely on what ChatGPT gives you. You need to have multiple sources. You need to have multiple checks.
Because everybody will believe what you say. I said, oh, blah, 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 blah.
Exactly right. And if ChatGPT told me, it must be right.
Not. What about the Apple in hot water as iOS 17 bugs and the third-party apps cook up iPhone 15 overheat drama? I get that with my phone too. If I leave it on in my pocket, it gets hot.
Yeah, and this is a problem. You want your phones to be faster. You've got more powerful chips on board, but heat dissipation is a problem. When the iPhone 15 came out, it was noticed by some people that phones were a bit hot. They thought it was an iPhone 15 problem, but as it turned out, it was actually the upgrade to the operating system. So iOS 17 came out at the same time as the iPhone 15 was released. But older phones, say iPhone 14s for example, they could also be upgraded to the iOS 17 operating system. And so they were getting hotter as well. So it wasn't specific to the iPhone 15. So essentially, people noticing phones getting hotter. In particular, some apps, so Instagram was one. If you're in Instagram using it, it got to the stage where it wasn't too hot to hold in your hand, but it was getting up some temperature readings that people were showing, getting up around 37 degrees Celsius for your phone, which is pretty warm. I mean, our body temperature is 37, so that feels pretty warm. If you've got something holding in your hand that's 37 degrees Celsius, you really notice that temperature. So Apple have said, yes, we've noticed some problems with some apps in particular. We've noticed some problems with the operating system. We're going to do an update to the operating system once we work out what the actual problem is. And that's the issue at the moment. They're going to do an update, but they haven't released that update yet, even though they acknowledge there is a problem with that. So it's not to do with the titanium casing on the iPhone 15. It's not to do with the faster processor on the iPhone 15. It's all to do with some little bug in the operating system that's causing something to run faster than it needs to be and therefore generating a bit of extra heat.
Not good.
Not at all.
I notice it a lot actually when I put my phone in my pocket. I say, "Oh, I've got some app running." I better get it out, get it off, and close it off.
And that's exactly right, because you often just leave the apps running in the background. You don't think about it too much, but they're all using that little bit of power and obviously a little bit of battery life and generates a little tiny bit of heat. Add them up, sometimes it can be too much.
Indeed. Well, it's been a pleasure having a chat to you again about all the latest technology. Dear, oh dear.
Well, I'm looking forward, Chris, to seeing the deep fake of you.
Oh no.
That's when it gets interesting, when you start to see...
You're videoing me, maybe it'll just go leak.
Maybe this is the deep fake version of Chris, who knows? Is this really Chris in the studio?
Am I selling anything?
Any insurance plans for us?
Not today. Well, once again, thank you for coming into DCFM 88.9, having a chat about all the latest technology.
Thanks, Chris.
And we'll be back again next week, will we?
Why not?
All right, let's have another chat next Wednesday.
Sure.
All right, well, thanks again for joining us today on DCFM 88.9, Matthew. And we'll get back into some more good music right after this.